Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No mai, haere mai, and greetings all. I highly recommend that all hospitality outlets in Parnell listen to today's episode of Parnell Eco Bites, short and sharp, topical conversations in the eco space. 8 to 10 questions, one presenter, released monthly. My name is Cheryl Adamson, and I'm the General Manager of the Parnell Business Association. My husband showed me recently that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is now 3 times the size of France, which is really hard to believe and awful to see. And while there's quite a bit of composting going on here and there, and certainly with a lot of our hospitality outlets in Parnell, sometimes containers and the waste from containers seems an insurmountable problem. So we're really happy today to welcome our guest, Nadia Piatek from Again, who has found a technology-based solution that is extremely practical for customers and food vendors alike. I looked on her website yesterday, and there's only 2 Parnell businesses featured, so we have a very long way to go. I would now like to hand over to Josephine Rudkin-Binks, who's a board member of the Parnell Business Association and our sustainability champion, to interview Nada. Over to you, Joey.
Kia ora, thank you, Cheryl. So, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Josephine toku ingoa. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Nada to you today. So, Nada Piatek is the co-founder and managing director of Again, a container management system for takeaways without the throwaway, applicable for FMCG businesses, hospitality, brewers, and more. Again's technology-based solution facilitates business-to-consumer businesses to loan out containers of their choice, ones that best suit the vendor's own food and drink offerings. Launched in 2018, initially only with coffee cups, Again has forged a path for the share economy to challenge the wasteful and unsustainable practices involving single-use packaging in the hospitality industry. Nada is a seasoned entrepreneur who brings business savvy to impact and values-led enterprises. With over 22 years of leadership experience and social entrepreneurship, Nada focuses on the sustainability and achieving results on a triple bottom line. It is her and Again's vision that choosing waste-free takeaways is the new normal. So welcome, Nada. I'd love to hear a bit more about Again and what your role is.
Tēnā koe Josephine, tēnā koutou. Again, as you've very well articulated, is a technology platform that makes it easy for vendors, retailers, or brands to loan out real containers instead of single-use packaging. I think all of us have come to an understanding that the plastic waste problem around the world is overwhelming, and 1/3 of that plastic waste is made up of single-use packaging. So it's definitely in the firing line. We see a lot of recycling and composting solutions that are tabled, but actually the percentage of those materials that is genuinely recycled or composted is very small. The nature of, and when I say very small, it's perhaps 9% in recycling, and the most recent accurate stats show that only 1 in 400 compostable cups gets to a compost facility that is able to take them right through the whole journey. For the most part, compostable packaging, if it does get to an industrial compost facility, is often seen as contamination and taken out. So there are only 8 facilities in New Zealand that will take compostable packaging, and they will only take it if it comes from a known source via a waste collector. So anything that you get at a cafe, for example, and then drop in a bin in your office or on the street won't make it to a compostable to a compost facility that can deal with it. So it's an academic solution rather than a practical solution. Reusable packaging, on the other hand, is a really wholehearted solution in that you simply don't create the waste, but it is extraordinarily difficult to deploy at scale and to make it easy. So we're working on the process of that, but I'm the first person to tell you that it's not going to be easy and that it is a bit of a journey. So we came to market in 2018 with our first pilot, which was in the coffee industry. We bought 2 different sizes, an 8-ounce and a 12-ounce cup to market, and we put them into what ended up being about 200 cafes. Everyone was really enthusiastic, wanted to be part of that solution at that stage. And 2 things happened. The first is that we proved that that's actually got a lot of shortcomings, that deposit return mechanism, and it's hard to get people to use it. And then secondly, COVID came along and collapsed the hospitality industry and within our business. So we had a start that we've taken a lot of learnings from. There are still businesses, we've got about 100 businesses around the country that continue to use that deposit return mechanism, and it does work in some circumstances, but it also has its shortcomings. The COVID collapse gave us the opportunity to step back and say, what's next? How do we address this issue in a way that we can more comprehensively solve the problem? And so we looked to technology. By using technology, we can connect all the actors in the value cycle. We don't. It's a circular chain rather than a linear one. So in that value cycle, and by doing so, everyone is held accountable, and that means that the brand or the vendor can give a valuable, often beautiful cup or container to the borrower or to the consumer, having the confidence that that container is either going to come back, and the vast majority do. We evidence 98 to 99% return rate, or if it doesn't come back, that they will be financially compensated for it. And so essentially that's what our technology does. Rather than trying to explain that workflow to you, I'd like to show it to you because it's a picture fancy does work. So our technology is in 2 parts. There's a consumer app, so all the computing work gets done in people's pockets, and then there's a scan station that sits on the counter of the cafe. And we were told very clearly by our vendors that any hardware that we needed to put into the cafe had to be completely easy to use. It couldn't be hardware that needed to be plugged in and people trained on. So this is it. In the top here, there is an NFC token which has programmed into it the information that's relevant to that cafe. I'll show you how that works in a second. So literally this just sits on the counter. As a borrower or a consumer, I've downloaded the app and I've put in an email address and credit card details. That's the bare minimum that we need. And you can see here that I open the app on the shelf. So this is a catalogue of all the things that I've borrowed that is in my responsibility. And you can see here that I've previously borrowed a couple of cups. I now go into the coffee shop, let's say Havana at the bottom of Parnell, and I say, I'd like to have a flat white and I'd like it in a real cup, please. And so the flat white is transacted separately, the cup is borrowed. And so I hit this borrow button up the top here. It asks me to scan the scan station, which I do, and it reads the information here and it says, I see you're at, in this case, Coffee Cacophony is this cafe. These are the containers that are available to borrow. And I say, great, I'd like to have a large size. I hit the borrow button and the technology checks everything and says, that cafe can loan it to you and you're a valid borrower. We know that you are going to be responsible. We're all good. This is a green screen, which essentially acts as a receipt to say that transaction has occurred. I now hit finish, and you can see there that that is now sitting on my shelf and is in my responsibility. So the barista now can hand me a coffee in a $30 cup, and I can leave the cafe, and everybody is happy on a financial level. As long as that cup comes back in a given time, and the reverse is true, I won't go through that, but essentially you hit it, you return it, and you get your green screen. As long as that occurs, everybody's happy. There is no value that's been lost. The cafe pays an issue fee that is cheaper than the single-use cup that they would otherwise have purchased and then made part of the sale of the coffee to the consumer. And Bob's your uncle. If it doesn't come back, then our app will nudge the consumer and say, come on, it's time to get it back. You've got 3 more days. If they fail to return it, then they get a $3 extra time charge, which gives them a little bit more, exactly like a library works. And then again, notified and nudged. And if they still fail to return it, then at that point, we execute the sale, and we charge the end user the value of the cup, and then we reimburse or replace the cup for the vendor, so that when the vendor has put in an investment into those lovely cups at the start, they're not losing their money. And that, in essence, is all of it.
It's a very simple concept when you've explained it and demonstrated it. So thank you.
That's a pleasure.
What do you think then?
I would like though to acknowledge that that it's not easy. And the two things that are not easy is getting people to download an app can be tricky. And so we have a few mechanisms that will help people with that. We've got cards that you can give on the counter to say, look, we'll give you your coffee in that cup this time, but why don't you go back to your office and set it up so you're ready next time. And we also have a peer-to-peer referral mechanism whereby if I refer you and say, why don't you do this and you get started, then you're going to get your first coffee for free, and then I'm going to get a kickback coffee once you get started on that. So there are mechanisms in there that are needed. And then the scan station itself is a bit of extra work. We're working on integrating that so that it will actually go through as part of the point of sale transaction, but that's not going to be released until October this year, and not to every POS system to start with. So we're still very much in that journey of resolving those issues. And we want to set people's expectations about that, because there is no out-of-the-box solution that's completely resolved. We are on the journey of creating it and looking to work with vendors and with consumers who actually are on that development journey with us.
I mean, given you've made it as simple as you can, you also offer an incentive for a free coffee for referring a friend, which is great. What do you still think holds people back from action?
The key thing is that returnable packaging, by definition, will never compete with single-use packaging on convenience. There is nothing more convenient than doing nothing. And so single-use packaging will always have that advantage over returnable packaging or reusable packaging. And so someone's why then falls back on, it's the right thing to do. I want to be in the club that's part of being the solution. And then I think this is where regulation actually plays a part too. What we're seeing overseas, particularly in the UK and Europe, where regulation is now making single-use packaging twice the price, is that the convenience versus price equation comes into it, and is definitely driving behaviour change. So finding a way to motivate people to be in the club actually is the key thing. And what we see is that there's an absolutely linear equation between people having front of house champions who engage their customers to be in the club and uptake or use. If vendors simply buy a bunch of cups and put them on the top of the coffee machine, nothing will change. If that's all they do, nothing at all will change. But if you've got someone on the counter who will say, have you got your cup there, mate? Oh, it's all right, you can borrow one of ours, then that's an entirely different equation. And people want to be in the team. That's part of the solution. They just actually don't know how, or they're not given the incentive to try. So that's the key difference between success and low uptake that we've seen in the network so far.
Yeah. And you started again and again in 2018. What was your aha moment?
I was working in the leadership team at Sustainability Trust in Wellington, and we were delivering workshops for businesses to help businesses reduce their waste. And we saw that a third to a half of the waste that's going into offices and then going out in the waste streams is packaging. And it's really tangible when you're actually sifting through the bins and handling the stuff. So I had a bit of a light bulb moment, and I thought I'd solve the problems for the world, and went and Googled it and realised that I was absolutely not the first person to have thought of it, but that it was being deployed around the world at that stage in varying degrees of scale. And within a week, I'd quit my job and was building it. I'm an entrepreneur. I've always been an entrepreneur, and so if I'm honest, I loved my job at Sustainability Trust, but I'm not actually a very good employee. I like to be the one that creates things and makes new things happen. And so that was a pretty easy decision for me to move on and focus on that.
Yeah, okay. And talking about making new things happen, I saw when you had your phone up, there was a flagon, and I'm assuming that isn't for coffee, although some mornings probably could do with a flagon of coffee. But I believe you've got a beer project, a beer bottle project. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, we have. So we're working with Garage Project, particularly in Wellington, so the vast majority of tap poured beer is sold into brown plastic riggers that they can't even be recycled. Even if they get into the recycling stream, they have to go offshore, and mostly it's uneconomic and it doesn't happen. So they're pretty much a definite waste stream material. And so we're working with them with the support of the Plastics Innovation Fund, the government's PIF fund, and we've got a few other stakeholders who have also contributed financially on quite a big project that has now identified, we're halfway through it, so we've identified a beer flagon that is most acceptable to most of the stakeholders that have put their opinions in. They will be fully funded, and we will offer them to, there's 50 spots around the country, so retailers and brewers who sell tap beer into flagons using our platform. But really importantly, we're also, within the scope of the project, we're also developing the technology so that in some instances, people won't have to download an app. They'll be able to set up their account on the back end of our website, and then they'll be issued with a card that will be much like a loyalty card. And so this is my New World card, but you'll have on your phone, you'll have the ability to pull up a barcode, which then just gets either scanned during the sales transaction, or there'll be a 6-digit number that you'll be able to apply to the sales purchase. That will mean that you don't have to have an app and you don't have to have this. And so from an innovation perspective, that's a really big step forward, and it takes us to a position where we can then start to service a much greater part of the ecosystem, and particularly supermarkets and pre-packaged goods. So people who are critical of the project rightly point out that the quantity of beer that's sold into plastic riggers is minuscule compared to what is sold into bottles and cans, and they're absolutely right. But the reason we chose the beer industry is that people who buy tap beer from cellar doors are there for the experience. It's an experiential thing, and so we can tap into that and that interaction that occurs to drive behaviour change. And behaviour change is 100% the gnarliest, hardest part of all of this. And so there are lots of opportunities in that ecosystem that allow us to step the solution and the innovation forward, and that's what we'll be deploying.
Oh, excellent. No garage.
To that
project.
end, I'd love to have more. We've still got spots available. So we've actually got amazing buy-in from the craft brewing industry, but there are still positions available. And if there are members of your organisation in Parnell who would like to benefit from those funded containers, those funded flagons, my way.
Excellent. Yeah, we've got probably a number, so yeah, we'll make sure we send them. You've mentioned earlier that obviously there's different bans on single-use plastics, and there's new items have come in this month in July. But as a country, how do you think New Zealand's doing?
I saw that your question on the list that you sent me.
Yes,
diplomatic.
On kind of reducing single-use plastics. You know, obviously we have, you know, it has its first iteration came out last year. There's new items this year. There's some more in 25. 25 seems a long way off to be banning single-use.
I'm very,
I think you can be honest.
I think the things that have happened, I'm very supportive of. I think we are moving at a glacial pace, and I am critical of political decisions that appear to be being made to advance political standing rather than waste minimisation or environmental, positive environmental impact. It is deeply disappointing that we can see that the work that we've done on developing a solution in New Zealand versus the same work that is being done by comparable companies in the UK and Europe is landing completely differently. And so we're looking at these companies who are doing exactly what we're doing, but in those geographies, and they're just taking off and really seeing user adoption and traction that we would love to be seeing, but the reality is that we're not. And in the absence of regulation that levels the playing field between single-use and reusable packaging, it's always going to be like that. So I think the government has got a lot more to do. That said, there are some great initiatives within government that are supporting change from the ground up. So we're extraordinarily grateful to have the support of the Plastics Innovation Fund, for example, and we're getting really great support actually from councils. There's a number of councils around the country that are investing in their own communities. We categorically don't apply for funding actually from councils, but we support local initiatives that are getting great funding from councils to build their networks in their areas, and then we are a service provider to those networks. And I applaud that. I mean, all of that is good stuff, and there's definitely a role for central money to create behaviour change that makes it easier for the regulators to change the law you can't change a law if it's to make something work if it's also going to collapse the hospitality industry, for example. And if you were to ban single-use packaging at the moment, that's precisely what would happen. So I understand that the regulators can't change those laws until there's something that they can change to. And so there is definitely a place for councils and government to be supporting innovation like with Again and others. We're definitely not the whole solution, but there's a place there for that change to occur. But on balance, I am more critical of the glacial pace at which we're moving than I am supportive of what is happening.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that at least at a local level, the grassroots level, those projects are sort of having some success. That's really important from the ground up, really.
Indeed, and actually the key indicator for that success is geographic density. So our most successful projects, or our most successful networks, are in Wellington and in Wanaka, where there is community drive, creating change in a geographically tight area. And so this is where actually Parnell has got a great opportunity, because if you've got good communication between you and you create something that is Parnell specific, then you will have more success than if you do it as a bunch of individual organisations.
Yeah, we're definitely very blessed with great hospitality outlets. If there was one piece of advice for a business, what would that be?
Just do something. Don't try and be perfect. Just get started. I think perfection in the sustainability space is the enemy of progress. And so what we really need is everybody being imperfect innovators rather than trying to solve all of the problems or for everyone before you get started. And I've had to learn that the hard way. We have had to acknowledge the shortcomings in our solution, but still back what we're doing with the belief that we are on a pathway towards something that can genuinely change the world. And I think every single business, whether you're actually in the business of innovating in sustainability or whether you're in the business of serving coffee and great food, has the opportunity to be on that journey. And so just get started, because if you're doing something that's better than yesterday, then we're all better off for it.
Excellent. Yeah, great advice. Thank you, Nada. Thank you, Nada. It's really interesting. I think you're doing amazing work trying to reduce single-use plastics and supporting the circular economy. So thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed hearing more about Again.
thanks for the opportunity. I look forward to having all the businesses in Parnell be in contact with us.
Thanks, Nada. Thanks from me. And yes, I look forward to having chats offline with you. We sort of run out of time now, but I'll contact you offline and chat a bit more about what we can do in terms of reaching our guys.
Great. Yeah, definitely a coordinated response is the way forward. And I think for so many people, it is entirely valid that it feels overwhelming and impossible. There is validity in that feeling, but that feeling is, things become more achievable if you have got a few people doing it together.
Awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time.